Being at Sundance with our subjects and their coaches was amazing. It was like very emotional for everyone. I think everybody was in tears. And Josh Gad came. He's one of our exec producers. So Josh Gad was there and they all got pictures with him and hung out with him at the reception. People would come up to them after the film. They would just walk up to them on Main Street. They were there for 4 days and every day people were coming up to them saying, "You are amazing. I want my kid to do this," or "Keep it up." I think it's great. And I think it brings communities together. So it was pretty special. My name is Guy Mossman. My day job is director of photography. I live in Los Angeles, and I moonlight as a director. I'm here to talk about a film called Speak. We just premiered it at Sundance. We're very excited about it. It is a film that I conceived of during COVID. I felt a need during that time, and in 2019, before COVID, to tell a story about young people that were kind of addressing issues that were on all of our minds, in my mind. During that time, and in 2019, before COVID, to tell a story about young people that were kind of addressing issues that were on all of our minds. And we're stepping up, and we're the ones that, in a way, were not only like getting into it and like trying to show those in power, like how to have a real substantial conversation or debate about an issue. But we're also in a world that had sort of a subculture, if you will, like of speech and debate, which is fun, it's quirky, it has all the things you want, I think, in a film: competition, passion. But these were kids that were also sort of visionaries in their own right. This is a film about 5 of these visionaries that we spent 2 years casting, and we finally got the project on its feet and started shooting in June of 2023. But it took that long. It took 3.5, 4 years to kind of get all the pieces in place, get the money in place, get everything cast, as I mentioned, and find the right creative partners. Jen Teixeira came on board to direct this with me. I have a stellar group of exec producers that came on early to help me through all of that. But it just takes time, to get projects on the feet. I felt like in order to make this film, there's no way I could have just cold called principals, teachers, say I want to make this film. I needed to have a partner at the national level so I reached out to the organization that organizes all of this. They made everything possible. So they were able to give me the names of students who had qualified for next year's competition, the next year's nationals. They were able to provide me, open doors with me and introduce me to teachers, kind of bless the project, if you will. That was important in my case because otherwise I would spend some random dude. We had amazing casting producers who we were able to hire, who came on board as part of development. And then we worked with them and the NSTA to basically pre-screen 300 students that we thought were like strong, that were smart, that were like funny and interesting, had everything we might want. And then we whittled it down. It took about 6 months. Then I went and we did a kind of a shoot scout at the Nationals in 2023 in June, and that's where the film starts. I feel like there's been a lot of great competition films over the years, but I felt like I wanted this one because I was in the driver's seat, so to speak. I wanted to shoot at Anamorphic for a reason. I always did. And in part because I felt like these kids and what they're doing is so impressive and interesting, and I just felt like they're kind of like, there's like super people. They're like little supermen, right? They all have superpowers, and this is their superpower. And so I wanted to kind of elevate that look a little bit. So that was one reason, I guess. I felt like Anamorphic would be a really good fit. But traditionally Anamorphic is, the lenses are large, heavy. You have close focus issues, so it wouldn't have been practical. But I think the timing of this project really coincided amazingly with the development of the Mercury lenses because they are just like the perfect size, sort of compact enough and light enough. And so I got very excited when I learned about the Mercuries. But so I'd always thought about the look of the film as something that just felt it just felt like we were in a different world, like a very special place. So the camera, we started on the Venice 2. I love that camera. We decided, though, that we would transition to the FX6 because we wanted 2 cameras in the field, and it would just been too much budget-wise to have 2 Venices. So we had 2 FX6s, and then when the Burano was released, then we shot with that. So we had a Burano for half the shoot, basically. Half of those days we had a Burano and an FX6 together. The final shoot, I think we had 5 cameras, and so it was FX6s and the Burano, basically. We also did shoot with a 4D, and so we used a different set of lenses. The Mercuries would have been too big, so we used a different set of spherical lenses for that one. So our go-to was the 36. I wanted to shoot almost everything I could with that lens. So that meant getting up close, and instead of using zooms or long lenses, we really wanted to kind of give the audience a feeling that intimacy and that feeling of being close to the subjects. The other lenses were helpful too in different situations. We used some sphericals as well. We were in classrooms a lot, so in those situations, we weren't allowed to change lenses or necessarily move a camera around. That was very important, that we had to be as invisible as possible inside the classrooms during the competitions. So we used spherical zooms in those settings. With time, they got used to us. We shot 77 days, I think, with our subjects over the course of a year. So we had a lot of time with them. But certainly there are situations in the film where being up close physically wouldn't have been appropriate. So we'll shoot a scene locked off or on the easy rig, pulled back, and it's just holding on the wide. And in some ways that also just lets the audience kind of take in the setting and the environment without feeling like you're up in their grill. Because sometimes with documentaries, if you're doing that too, not only can it make them self-conscious, it also, I think, gives the audience kind of a feeling that we're not trying to impose. And I think that's important. I think audiences really are more aware of that, especially with young people. There were a lot of lessons learned along the way for me, or at least it was a learning process for all of us, how we were going to shoot this in a way that was still safe, where they felt safe or they felt, they could be themselves and not. But with time, like in any film, with time, the whole point with verite filmmaking, I think you're also just, often you're putting down the camera and you're just you're being part of the inner circle in a way. You're like, you have to build trust, and you can't do that shooting all the time. So as often it was just, you're building that kind of confidence and the rapport with your subjects, and with the camera, without the camera. And so there were 77 shoot days, but there were a lot of days where we weren't shooting too, that we were spending time with them. The parents and the teachers are more cautious than ever about how young people are being represented or how a person is being represented. And so it's more than just the minor or the teenager. It's also about all the other caregivers that are around them, caretakers or their guardians, and making sure that everyone is feeling comfortable. And sometimes that means being more conservative and having to make decisions on the fly about maybe not shooting a scene, or maybe shooting it differently, backing off, and consulting with them. I think that was really important for us, that they had a say. We were not there to film whatever we thought was important. We wanted to shoot also what they thought was important. And the teachers and the coaches, they're the gatekeepers ultimately. So we have to make sure that they're, part of the conversation. And it's interesting, as a DP, I was co-director on the project and DP. I found myself in situations where I was probably didn't have the sort of big picture in the moment, because I'm so thinking about getting the scene, capturing the different, getting the coverage, keeping things lit the way I want it or whatever, or just staying present for how this scene was going to cut together, and emotionally going for the truth of that scene. But it's also important to have others around you. So I learned a lot on this project about how producers are really important. And if you're directing something and shooting it, having someone else there to help kind of keep perspective and keep sort of like their eyes on everything that's going on. Yeah, we wanted to keep the footprint small, but at the same time, we knew that it was important to have support with a good AC. So we flew in. Our crew was basically a first AC, Jen, my directing partner, a producer, Pam, and myself. So that was, and a second camera operator. So generally 5 of us flew in, and we would hire sound locally. That's, for a lot of productions, documentary productions, that's a lot. And but we felt it was really important because we were shooting in schools. We were shooting in situations where parents may not understand everything. We wanted to make sure everything was being handled really well and professionally. And so we could just focus on making the film while Pam, our producer, was really handling, the communication and the hand-holding and just everything that needs to happen as a producer, the releases. And local sound, we had no problem finding great sound people. The biggest mistake I think I made, when I think about what I've learned, is I went from being a DP to a producer, and I should have just been a DP. I asked one of our subjects if I could film a scene with them that I felt was really going to be germane to the story, and the timing was off for that. It caused a little bit of friction, I think, and so we had to kind of, over time, regain some confidence, but I also needed to realize that was a question there would have been a better time to ask for permission to shoot that scene and things like that. So that was probably my biggest mistake, but I made mistakes. We've all made a lot of mistakes, but I think I've learned that it's okay to be mixing. It's more important to be focused on story. When I came into this project, I was very like, this is going to be shot with this lens, this is going to be shot with this camera. And I think that having gone through this process, kind of seen it from the other side, I think you can be really creative with a lot of different tools in a project. So we shot with split diopters, which I love using. We brought sphericals into it. I didn't feel like, I think it was mixing that spherical and anamorphic. I know there are projects that and DPs that do that, but I had never done that, and I just started doing it, and it was like, okay, this works. We can make this work. Audiences won't necessarily realize. As a DP, I wanted to be a purist about it, but I realized that to tell a story, sometimes you need to kind of cast a wider net a little bit and be more flexible to try new things. I think that often as a DP, you're so focused on the technical elements, but also trying to capture emotionally what is happening. And to switch gears, it's a tremendous skill to be able to do that. I think to be able to direct and shoot. And there are some directors that do it really well and are able to do that. But I learned that I'm better just leaning into one and then leaning on someone else, or relying on someone else to help make some of those decisions. I mean, this is a unique project because I was my own boss in a way, right? I developed this project. I raised the money for it with others came on to help, and we did that, and it was a group project, and there are a lot of stakeholders involved. But from the beginning, it's just after 5 years of kind of nurturing it along, sometimes, letting go, that was probably one of the biggest challenges for me. Letting go and just, letting everyone play and do what they do best and working as a team. There was a scene where in the Nationals where one of our subjects, she came out of her round and she had made some mistakes in the round and she was very emotional. She sat down next to a set of lockers with her mom and I came in close with the 36. And I was, following that instinct to kind of be there for that. But then I realized that she was crying, it was very emotional. She got up and went into the bathroom with her mom And so then I pulled out for a wide and just shot an empty hallway with the lockers and then the bathroom, and you hear them inside, her mom comforting her. And that was an interesting situation where I had to kind of reposition, and I did indeed like cross the line right there. So that was, different. We shot a lot of high frame rate stuff in this. So the kids often do these warm-ups. So we shot them, a lot of them high frame rate, because they're very physical as well. So, so you see that in the film. And then there are visual elements that we wanted to capture. Sam's boyfriend at the time, we captured a dance that he did for us. He's Native American, and so he dressed up for us. He's very proud. So we shot that at high frame rates. And so that became like a visual, like a key visual. Then we went out to the fair with Noor and her boyfriend. That was a lot of fun, just because it was, full of the, movement and lights, and we wanted to kind of shoot things in a more stylized way. The Nationals final stage is where our characters did their final competition. And so we had a camera backstage, which is what I did, capturing some of the pre-competition nerves, all of that with our subjects. And that I shot on a 36. And then on stage, we had 2 cameras on each corner shooting talent on stage. So they were covering from the front. Those were on long lenses that were spherical. They were on zooms. They were Canon 25 to 250s. And one thing you can do with those lenses, you can extend them 1.5 times, and then they will cover a large format sensor. So it's 1.5 times. So you're looking at like a 37 to 375 roughly. This was a really big stage. So we needed that kind of focal length. We couldn't be on stage with a Steadicam. I wanted that. I tried for that. And then in the audience, we had 2 cameras roaming. And those were all with Mercuries as well. So we intercut the sphericals that were on the front of the stage with the Mercury backstage, and then the Mercuries that were in the audience. As a cinematographer, I love to use natural light and existing light as much as I can, but to do that well, you do have to bring in practicals sometimes. So we brought bulbs in for practicals like that are there in the helms, and then we brought in tubes, so we could put tubes in different places just for some color accent lights. And then we had small MC4 LEDs that were also really helpful, and we could plant those in different places. But for the most part, we really tried to use either natural light if it was daytime, windows, and then we bring in these practicals. For interviews, however, often we would key off of, if we had a bright window, bright background, we had to fight, then we would bring in a bigger light, so to key off that with a big chimera. We do have some interviews in the film, but we tried to minimize the use of interviews, and so you have a lot of voiceover in the film, like predominantly a lot of VO. We also use string lights. We put string lights up, just to help for when we did shoot the interviews. I like to be as unintrusive as possible, so I don't necessarily want to come in and spend 3 hours lighting. Often we just have to go into a situation when we can't pre-light anything. So these cameras are pretty good at low light situations, and the lenses are pretty fast, actually. So, but I rated the lens, generally speaking, shooting at an 800 ISO. I basically shot at a 2.84 split with these lenses mostly. And I found that gave me enough contrast. It helped I think for this genre. I just felt like we needed a little more sharpness. They're very sharp, actually wide open, but I wanted a little more contrast. So I closed down a stop. So right now we have a sales team, so we're in talks with different buyers. I can't say anything now, but we're all optimistic. We also have some great partners who are introducing us to brands to help underwrite impact campaigns, which is basically like an educational campaign that has the purpose of, in our case, what we want to do is get this film in front of school board members across the country. So we need a national brand to help underwrite that, and can potentially could also pay for and help underwrite the NSDA's budget for the nationals. The goal of the impact campaign that we're putting together is to create events around the country that draw school board members in to see the film and to then start conversations about the value of speech and debate in schools, and like how schools and districts can benefit, how they can find coaches in order to create these programs, and we can just get people excited about like this world. And like, it's not, I think the biggest misconception is that it's very expensive, too expensive to create. Yes, it takes resources, but it's not nearly as expensive as running a football team. And we think that it should be considered a sport. I mean, I think it should be considered a sport of some sort. So like we should have the opportunity to meet with school board members and for them to see that it has as much value or more than funding traditional sports. This is a really tough market, so it might take a little while before we get the film out there, though, for general audiences. I'm proud of the fact that we actually got it done. Any documentary that gets done, you can't overstate how amazing and what an achievement that is. I'm proud that we premiered it at a Tier 1 festival at Sundance, no less. But I'm most proud of that we were able to do something different visually with the genre. That not only does it look different, but we captured the lives of our subjects with more depth and more attention to who they are as people in the film, and how that is reflected in the speeches that they're writing, right? These are very personal speeches. They're 10 minutes long, but they're also relate to some universal themes, and they're basically trying to unpack some issue or something they think is wrong about the world we live in, right? They're playing doctor in a sense. So it has to be, but it also has to be very personal. We felt it was really important to kind of dive into their lives a little more than the traditional competition documentary. So Jen and I don't like to call it a competition doc, but there is a competition through line. So I think there are some critics who get it. There's some people who really get it, that we're trying to do something different. And there's some people who feel like we've kind of adhered to the formula. We like to think we've kind of pushing the formula a little bit, visually and in terms of how we tell the story with our kids.